By now, I'm sure, many of you have realized that there are two things that I've committed to in my preaching over the last few years. Two things that sometimes may clash with one another. First of all, I have committed to preach from the lectionary, a 3-year cycle of readings used by many different churches. But at the same time, I've also committed to this practice where when we celebrate an infant or a child baptism here at St. Andrew's, I want to focus in my worship and in my preaching on that most important and blessed event. Which means that today, on a day like today, I want to preach about Oliver and his family and this very important spiritual step that they have taken together today. That's actually one of my favorite things about Baptism Sundays. I look forward to it whenever the occasion arises. But I'm sure you can see where the problem, where the clash might come from. The people who choose the lectionary readings don't know and don't particularly care about when we celebrate baptism. So there's really no way of making sure that the passages that we read on a given day have anything to do with the baptism we perform during the service. So, as I prepared for today's service, it was with some trepidation that I opened up the list of readings for this Sunday, wondering if there might be one that might help me talk about what it is we've done here this morning. And I'll tell you something, when I read the opening words of our passage from Genesis this morning, I breathed a sigh of relief. Whew. Starts like this. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. Isn't that perfect? The passage opens by describing almost the exact situation we are celebrating today. A child has reached a certain age, and probably almost exactly the age that Oliver is today, because they would have weaned children somewhat later back then than is common today. And in that culture, obviously, this was considered to be a perfect moment to gather together with your friends and relations and the whole community and celebrate the birth and the early life of your child. And that's a lot like what we have come together to do today. We are celebrating Oliver as a symbol of new life and hope for the future. We celebrate his potential. We lift up prayers for his future. And I'm sure that's exactly what Abraham and Sarah were doing for Isaac on that occasion that they had organized. But if I was thrilled by the first sentence of our passage, I'll tell you something. My enthusiasm waned as I kept reading, because after that first sentence of the best of intentions and the most wonderful of celebrations, well, the whole story kind of falls apart, doesn't it? That's all we get. One sentence. After that, almost everything about this apparently perfect family that could go wrong does. See, it turns out that Isaac has an older half-sibling named Ishmael. And Isaac's mother sees the two boys playing, and she kind of freaks out. Now, whether her concerns about the two boys playing together are valid, whether Ishmael has maybe in some way played inappropriately with his younger brother, we are not told. I don't know whether Ishmael has done anything wrong. But I do know that, sometimes things do happen between siblings, maybe especially half-siblings, that can create stress in families. But here's the thing. As is often the case, it's actually not what the kids do, but how the parents overreact that creates the crisis and the problem in this story. Sarah is so upset at whatever she has seen that she demands that Ishmael and his mother get thrown out of the family. And I know that mothers are protective of their children. But this knee-jerk reaction of just kicking Ishmael out, I gotta say, is wrong. And in her anger, Sarah may not be thinking straight, but honestly, that's just human. Parents are just human. I know that's a radical thought, but let's hold on to that for a moment. So, Sarah has a bad reaction, over-the-top reaction. Maybe this would be a wonderful opportunity for her husband, Abraham, to step in and calm her down and maybe help to direct her anger in a more helpful direction. Everyone needs that sometimes, right? But it's at this point that, in my mind, Abraham fails, and fails more tragically even than his wife has. Because we're told this about Abraham's reaction. The matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. So pretty clearly here, Abraham knew that this was wrong. He was distressed about it. And let me say, first of all, poor Abraham, right? I mean, poor Abraham. I feel so bad for him, don't you? He started out this day ready to celebrate, and now it's kind of turned out to be the worst day ever, and he's so distressed. But wait a minute, who cares about Abraham's feelings? What are they compared to a mother and a son who are about to be turned out into the desert with nothing more than a loaf of bread and a skin of water? But hey, Abraham's supposed to be the hero of this whole story, so let's just focus on Abraham's feelings, right? No. Well, Abraham has the power to do something about this tragedy that's about to unfold. He doesn't do that. You might say, yeah, he sends his thoughts and prayers without doing anything other than gathering a skin of water and a loaf of bread, which doesn't amount to much. If you haven't picked up from my comments, I guess I would have to say I'm not really impressed with the parents in this story. Sarah fails. Abraham fails. The only one who stands up and does the best that she can for her child is the most powerless person in this story, Hagar. And such are the limitations on her power to do anything that she essentially gives into despair and almost gives up hope. And I can't really blame her for that either. So, here I am. This passage in Genesis starts out so wonderfully, reminding us of what we are celebrating here today, but then it quickly devolves into a tale of a deeply dysfunctional family. How on earth can I get anything constructive to say to Oliver and his family today? Well, let me put it this way. I am aware of the stresses and the strains that are on families today. Parents have these amazing expectations piled on them. They have to be perfect parents. And if you are like most parents, if you're like I was as a parent of young children, you kind of pile that expectation on yourself too. Every time you don't react like you think you should, every time you discipline too harshly or not firmly enough, every time something bad happens to your child and you can dream up some obscure way that you could have stopped it from happening, you won't forgive yourself. And of course, it's all the worse when you have people all around you telling you what they think you're doing wrong, which often seems to be the case these days. So if you have ever felt bad about your parenting or some other choices you've made, I think this story in Genesis stands as a wonderful reminder that parents are just humans. We all make mistakes. And no matter what you get wrong as a parent, I got to tell you something today. The effects of that mistake are going to be nowhere near as bad as the mess that Abraham and Sarah, these biblical examples of parents, make of their family in this story. But there's more going on in this story. More that should give us some encouragement. There is grace. Hagar and Ishmael are treated terribly in this story. And yet, despite that, we are told Ishmael does all right. God was with the boy, and he grew up, and he lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt. So, despite all that has been done to Ishmael, he seems to have been able to find his way in the world. Now, should Abraham and Sarah be given credit for Ishmael's success in life? I don't think so. If he succeeded in spite of them. And I hardly think that later in life he looked back fondly on that skin of water and loaf of bread that he received from his father, thinking that it gave him an excellent start in life. No, he came through it all despite a lack of his father's support, and despite the fact that his mother Hagar had so little to work with. But you see, this is the nature of God's grace. Whenever we fall short, whenever we fail to live up even to our best intentions, God has a way of bringing about good results in spite of us. And that, my friends, that is good news. The kind of good news that every one of us should hold on to whenever we feel as if we have failed or fallen short. God has a way of taking our worst mistakes and bringing something good out of them. And I can't tell you how often that very idea has given me comfort as I look back on the mistakes I made as a parent, in my work, maybe in some of the advice I've given over the years. I think it's a wonderful truth. But there is one caution I would put on that truth. Yes, it's always good to trust in God's grace, but you must never use it as an excuse to walk away from your commitments and your responsibilities. And that, my friends, that is exactly what I see Abraham doing in this story. We are told that God spoke to Abraham, saying, "Do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him also, because he is your offspring." Now, I don't know about you, but I am always suspicious when I hear someone claim that God told them to do something that only benefited themselves or offered them the easiest, most trouble-free course of action. In my experience, people who do that have misunderstood or taken the promises of God out of context. So here's what I see going on in that verse. Abraham knew, absolutely, that God was committed to his family and to his offspring. And yes, that included Ishmael. Of course God would take care of the boy. Of course God would make a great nation of him. This was a fundamental truth. And yes, Abraham heard that truth from God. When I say that, I don't mean that Abraham actually heard the voice of God reverberating from heaven, speaking clearly. Because the Bible's pretty clear that God speaks in various ways, and that doesn't necessarily have to be audible. But however, Abraham received that message. Yes, Abraham heard correctly. God's commitment to that boy was unshakable. But I do not believe, I do not accept that Abraham correctly heard or interpreted the implications of that truth. Because it was just easier for him to believe that that truth let him off the hook, that he didn't need to resist the evil thing that Sarah wanted to do. Lisa and Steve, we are thrilled, I am thrilled, to be able to celebrate with you today, your family and you. We honor your choice to raise children at a time when, honestly, lots of couples are finding it to be too expensive, too challenging. I know that the path that lies before you is not always going to be easy. It will always be worthwhile because your family is an expression of your love, but it will not always be easy. And I also know from personal experience that in the years to come, you will be surrounded by people who want to tell you how to raise your children. And some of that advice will be wise and helpful. Some of it, frankly, will just be somebody trying to make themselves feel good by convincing themselves that you're doing it all wrong. That advice you don't have to pay so much attention to. Now, I do understand that most people mean well when they try to give advice to parents. But the honest truth is, they often only manage to make parents feel as if they're wrong no matter what they do. So, I'm not going to try and give you any advice today, except follow your instincts. Follow the love that I know you carry in your hearts. Will you always get it right? No, nobody does. But your love will take you so far. And take comfort in the truth that we have affirmed and acted out today. God is committed to your child. God has amazing plans for your child. Plans you can't even dream of. Trust in that. Trust in God's grace. That's what the baptism has signified. God's grace will meet you and your family where you need it most. Lord God, grant your blessing and your grace on this family. Amen.